Hi everyone, here is the video for week 8 to just give you some more information about how to prepare your lesson plan. So this is continuing from last week. You started to plan a environmental education outdoor lesson using a PLT activity. And so last week you did some of the planning. This week you're going to actually transfer that planning into a lesson plan. So you're going to get familiar with the kind of lesson plans you're going to be creating for your lessons during your student teaching and at times during your teaching when you get into the profession. Most of the time we don't use this much detail unless we're being evaluated. And most of it is just writing out our thinking. So your assignment is due the 15th of the month this week, and you have a template as usual to use to fill out. And so I have included the template along with a checklist to make sure that you can kind of check over and make sure you're filling everything out correctly. So again, your PLT activity, you're going to take your learning targets from your planning sheet. Think about what is the vocabulary that needs to be introduced, what's some of the prep and setup that you might have to do beforehand, materials, any technology that you're going to use. Here's where you put in your safety considerations that you wrote in your planning document. Here's where you actually describe the sequence of the lesson. And I've included at least 4 of the 5 E's. I've taken out the engage and moved it up here so it's separate because I want to make sure that you're thinking about how am I engaging students specifically, and then you may not cover all 5 of these in this one lesson, but you should definitely have something to engage them. You should have some way for the students to explore, and then you should have some way for you to evaluate. The other thing you need to include, as I mentioned, is you have a literacy standard here. So you need a learning target that addresses the literacy standard. So you have to say something like students will be able to use the trade book to answer questions from the text using evidence, something like that. And you have to describe that in your lesson, how you're going to use the trade book and or how you're going to use the notebook page also should be in here. So you should be creating a notebook page for your students to complete. Again, that was part of last week's assignment. And then how do you differentiate your lesson? How do you adapt it to different students' needs? So, and then describe what your assessment is to determine if they've met those learning targets. So that's, I recognize this may be the first time you're doing an actual lesson plan based on some curriculum. So remember, this is just a draft, and so it's you're not going to have it perfect. Here's some things to watch for when you are completing the lesson plan. Make sure that it includes both the science and literacy standard. Make sure that your learning targets address both the science and literacy standard. It has clear labeling. So think about if someone were to walk into your classroom and pick up this lesson plan, would they be able to teach the lesson? Are you giving enough description of the procedures and the framework for someone to do that? Think about how you can use a pre-assessment also for understanding students' background. Remember, we talked about the probes. We saw how those might be helpful in understanding or getting students to expose their thinking about a concept. So you should have a pre-assessment listed, and it should probably be some sort of probe. You can create your own, but you can also use one of the Paige Keeley ones. There should be multiple practice or support for activities in the lessons. Describe how the trade book is being used. Have pre-written questions that could elicit student understanding. Think about how you're going to help. So it says to identify the vocabulary that they might need, but how are you going to get students to learn the vocabulary? What are some strategies for that? So thinking about like word walls or sentence frames, or I like to introduce vocabulary as we encounter it and have students work on, as you saw when we started class, students work on their own definitions and those build on each other as we go through the term. You need to make sure you label any of the 5 E's that you're using. Use a end of the lesson assessment to see if they actually met the learning targets, safety guidelines. Your science notebook page should be included, your materials list, and all of this should end up being about 3 to 4 pages. So that's the assignment this week. This might take you a little longer. That's why I suggested it might be good if you have a partner or work in a group, just because this one takes a little bit longer. If you do work in a group, make sure that you identify that on your lesson and put all of your names on there so that I know who was participating. So that is the homework assignment for today. So for your to-do list, it says we'll continue to work on this lesson planning, review the resources on Canvas about science notebooks, look at the examples that I provided for the birds and worms activity, and make sure you use the planning sheet that's linked to complete this. And this is all going to be due by November 15th. So sorry I got the video out a little bit late, and good luck with your work this week.